We're jumping into the story of a name that basically means conqueror, Alexander the Great. But before he was, world famous, he was a student. And today we're going to unpack the intense training that turned a Macedonian prince into the man who would lead vast armies.
Exactly. It's so important to understand that Alexander didn't just fall into this. He was, in a way, purpose-built by two of the most powerful people in the ancient world. We're looking at those fundamental years, the education, the discipline, everything that shaped him.
So let's set the stage. I was born in 356 BC, place is Pella, the capital of Macedonia, and his family life. Well, it was high-stakes drama right from the start. His dad was King Philip II.
A military genius in his own right. I mean, Philip was already turning Macedonia into a major powerhouse. Ambitious, formidable.
And his mother was Queen Olympias, who came from this powerful royal family over in Epirus. So this isn't just about having royal parents. He was born as the undisputed heir.
Right. And that meant immense responsibility was put on his, very small shoulders almost immediately.
Absolutely. So the palace wasn't some place for a lazy childhood. The expectation was that he had to be ready to lead at any moment. And even as a kid, he was already showing this really sharp mind and a lot of courage. For him, preparation wasn't just a good idea, it was destiny.
And that preparation started with a foundation of just iron discipline, both mentally and physically. Education was a huge deal for Macedonian royalty, even for a warrior's son.
So what were those first steps? He began with the basics, right? Mastering Greek, learning to read and write.
Yep, and music too. The lyre was pretty standard for any kid in a noble family.
But then his education takes a turn from sort of standard royal stuff to this really intense molding, and it starts with literature. He wasn't just reading Homer's big epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey.
No, he was expected to memorize huge sections of them.
Imagine that for homework. Having the Iliad, this story about demigods and brutal war, as required reading, what kind of effect does that have on a young mind?
It gives him a heroic roadmap. It's a moral and strategic blueprint for his life. He saw heroes like Achilles and Odysseus, not as, fictional characters, but as ancestors he had to live up to and hopefully surpass.
So his homework is directly connected to his future ambition. Okay, now let's talk about his first serious tutor. This guy sounds tough. Leonidas.
Leonidas was a relative of his mother, and he was brought in to handle the discipline side of things. He was known for being unbelievably strict. His whole philosophy was that a future king needs resilience, not luxury.
And that meant absolutely no luxury. I find the stories about him so fascinating. Like, he would actually check Alexander's personal trunks and boxes just to make sure his mom hadn't snuck in any treats or fancy clothes.
And that was totally deliberate. Leonidas was making sure Alexander learned how to survive on simple meals and just hard work. This wasn't just about building character, it was basic military training. It taught him to handle being tired and hungry without complaining,
preparing him to lead soldiers through harsh conditions later on. So he's building physical toughness, but the schoolwork wasn't ignored. He was also studying math and geography. Why geography specifically?
Well, because his father, Philip, was already expanding Macedonia's borders. If you're going to manage and grow an empire, you need to understand logistics, the distance between cities, the resources, the terrain. Math and geography gave him that mental map.
Okay, let's pivot, because when he turns 13, the training shifts in a huge way. It goes from tough discipline to, high philosophy. King Philip makes one of the most famous hires in history. He brings in Aristotle.
This was a masterstroke by Philip. He knew that just being a great fighter wasn't enough. A king needed wisdom. And to get Aristotle, one of the greatest thinkers of all time, Philip paid him a fortune and famously rebuilt Aristotle's entire hometown.
A town that Philip himself had destroyed earlier.
Exactly. That just shows you how much value he placed on Alexander's education.
So Aristotle sets up this special school in a place called Mieza. It sounds like this quiet, peaceful retreat with trees and stone paths. This wasn't just some classroom in the palace.
No, it was a proper academy. And Alexander wasn't the only student. Several other sons of noble Macedonian families were there with him. And this is a really critical detail because these classmates, Ptolemy, Hephaestion, they would later become his most trusted generals. They literally grew up together.
And the curriculum Aristotle taught was just massive. It sounds like he taught Alexander everything the world knew at that point.
He pretty much did. The subjects went from biology and medicine all the way to astronomy, natural history. But maybe the most important part was philosophy, especially ethics and governance, how to be a good and a fair leader.
What's so interesting is Aristotle's teaching style. He didn't just lecture at them. He encouraged them to use logic, to ask questions, to really think critically.
And that's the real advantage Alexander got from him. It wasn't just about collecting facts. It was learning how to process information and solve problems logically. It gave him this lifelong love for science and curiosity that fueled his later explorations.
So you have this young prince studying biology and philosophy, but his ambition is still all about those ancient heroes. Even with Aristotle as his teacher, Alexander still carried his copy of the Iliad everywhere.
Yes, and get this. That copy was actually annotated by Aristotle himself. It shows you how those two worlds were blending. Alexander genuinely believed he was a descendant of Achilles. The Iliad wasn't just a story for him, it was a template for his life.
Okay, but if Aristotle is teaching him to be a good and fair leader, a philosopher king, how do we square that with Alexander's later military actions, some of which were pretty brutal? Did the philosophy just not stick?
That's a great question. It's that tension between ideals and reality, right? Aristotle gave him the tools for ethical leadership, but Philip II gave him the ambition and the army to conquer. Alexander seemed to believe that the highest form of glory, the thing that makes you immortal, was the kind of conquest you see from Achilles. Sometimes the hero blueprint just won out over the ethics lecture.
And that heroic ambition needed practical skills to back it up, which brings us to the military training. He learned that straight from his dad, Philip II.
Philip was a true military revolutionary. He completely changed how armies fought. So Alexander was training with the very weapons and tactics that made the Macedonian army so feared.
This meant hands-on training with the sarissa. Let's just define that for a second. This wasn't a normal spear.
Oh no, it was deadly. The sarissa was this monstrously long pike, sometimes up to 18 feet long. When soldiers lined up in a formation called a phalanx holding these things, it basically turned them into a terrifying walking wall of spikes. Enemies couldn't even get close.
And he was practicing with this constantly. But it wasn't just formations. He was learning pure warrior skills.
Right. Horse riding, sword fighting with precision, and most importantly, strategy. He had to understand terrain, weather, logistics, all the things you need to plan a campaign. By his late teens, he was already an incredibly skilled fighter.
But being a king is more than just fighting. He also got a practical education in how to actually govern.
That's the key difference between a general and a king. He learned leadership not just from Aristotle's books, but by watching the messy, real-world business of running a kingdom.
So his dad made sure he was in the room for the important stuff.
Exactly. Philip had him attending meetings with ambassadors, listening to treaty negotiations, learning how the treasury worked. He saw firsthand that a good king had to be both a warrior and a clever politician.
And every great hero needs a great origin story. For Alexander, it's the story of his horse, Bucephalus.
It's just an iconic moment. It perfectly foreshadows who he's going to become. So this huge, wild horse is brought to King Philip, and it's supposedly untamable. None of the best trainers can even get near it.
But Alexander, who's still just a boy, he notices something everyone else missed. The horse isn't just vicious, it's terrified of its own shadow dancing on the ground.
So Alexander asks for a chance. Everyone tells him to get away, but he walks right up to the horse, speaks to it softly, and gently turns it to face the sun. The shadow disappears behind it, and the horse just calms right down. He jumps on its back and tames it easily.
And Philip's reaction is what makes the story. He doesn't just clap, he apparently burst into tears of pride. And he declares that Alexander needs to find a kingdom big enough for his ambitions, because Macedonia is clearly going to be too small for him.
It's this formal acknowledgement from his father of his son's greatness, but despite that moment of pride, their relationship was often very tense.
Yeah, it was complex. Alexander admired his father's success, but he also resented him. He was actually worried Philip would conquer the whole world before he even got his chance to prove himself. They had these loud public arguments.
That tension was very real, and yet Philip still trusted him. I mean, Alexander got his first real taste of command when he was only 16 years old.
16. And Philip was away attacking a city, so he left Alexander as regent. For anyone listening, that means he was the acting king. He was in charge, with full authority.
And of course, a northern tribe rebels, thinking it's their chance with Philip gone. Alexander doesn't wait. He leads the army, crushes the rebellion, and even founds a new city there. It was a massive validation of all his training.
But his real defining moment as a young warrior comes a few years later, the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. This was the battle where Philip finally defeated the combined Greek city-states.
And Alexander played the crucial role. He was given command of the elite cavalry. He leads the charge that shatters the Greek line. He wasn't just observing from the back, he was on the front line, fighting.
And that victory cemented his position. It proved his military skill not just to his father, but to the veteran soldiers. They saw their young prince fighting with incredible bravery. He earned their respect through action, which is something no book could ever do.
So by the time he's in his late teens, the foundation is set. It's all there. He's highly educated in science and philosophy thanks to Aristotle, but he has that fierce ambition and toughness from Leonidas and his father.
He's this complex, determined young man, mentally quick, culturally aware, but also a ruthless warrior. This unique blend created the leader who was ready to inherit and then expand the largest empire the world had ever seen.
His youth was this carefully calculated mix of influences, intellectual rigor on one side, and raw, practical military discipline on the other. That's what allowed him to command not just armies, but also the entire infrastructure of civilizations.
It makes you wonder, though, with that perfect foundation of mind, body, and ambition, if Alexander had never met Aristotle, would he have been as successful? Or would he have just been another powerful king instead of the revolutionary figure we remember? It's a question of whether his intellect guided his ambition or just served it.